We are winding up the life of Paul, just going through bit by bit some of the things that he wrote in the letters, in the epistles, going to various peoples, Timothy and Titus, or congregations such as Corinth, or the churches in Galatia or Thessalonica. And what we're doing at the moment is looking at what he says concerning himself and his experiences and what he went through. Because while Luke does give us an idea, does record some things, well, a lot of things, but not everything, of Paul's life, he doesn't give us a first-hand view of what Paul thought, of what Paul was going through. But Paul can. Paul can say that in fact he was in Corinth with fear and trembling. He could say that and talk about the beast of Ephesus and his experience of these things from the person who was in fact there, and the focus was on him. But in 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 5, we just go there very quickly and just read some things here. And this has to do, we're still on Paul as a preacher, and his attitude and his demeanor and his the way he conducted himself as a preacher. So 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 5, "For we do not preach ourselves, but Christ Jesus the Lord." All right, now he's already said things like that in other places. But notice, "and ourselves your bondservants for Jesus' sake." All right, not only do we not preach ourselves, we're not here for the glory of it, for the spotlight of it. We're not here to lift ourselves up in any sort of way whatsoever, as though we are anybody, because as he said in the first letter to Corinth, who is Paul and who is Apollos? We're just ministers. That's all we are. And now he's saying, your bondservant. All right, that they were your bondservants. Okay, for Jesus' sake. And so this is his attitude. This is the way he conducted himself. Now let's go to chapter 11. Now we have read several things from chapter 11, but this time we're going to verse 6. So 2 Corinthians 11 verse 6, "Even though I am," look at this, "untrained in speech." This is one of the things that can be said about Paul. We can read his speeches in the book of Acts. We have a few there. And of course, we can understand that when he spoke in certain times, that he is an inspired speaker. We can know that because that's exactly what Christ said was going to happen with his apostles. That they would be, not every time they spoke would it be inspired. Not every time at all. All right, what do you want for lunch? The answer might not be inspired. All right, probably would not be inspired. But when it comes to sermons, when it comes to answering biblical questions, especially when it's being recorded in the biblical text, it's going to be inspired. Now, he says he's not trained in speech. And there were those, and he had made mention of it, who were saying that his presence is weak. All right, he wasn't what you might call a dynamic speaker. He's not like Apollos, who was very fluent and very articulate and very the best way of phrasing something, or just being able to pull out words, large words and complicated sentences, and do all those things and do it very, very smoothly. He didn't do that. And he doesn't really want to do that either. That he doesn't want to make disciples for Paul. He wants to make disciples for Christ. And, as we have stated, It doesn't matter if someone gives you the truth and they say it in just the perfect wording, nothing wrong grammatically, everything is just perfectly well understood, nothing there. Or someone gives you the truth and they have a stutter, or their grammar is off, using the wrong tense of using verbs you do realize that is a verb for a singular subject, not a plural subject. It doesn't matter. The truth is the truth. That's what's being conveyed. And it doesn't matter if it is spoken by someone who is like an Apollos or someone who is very humble and saying, I am untrained in speech. It doesn't matter. The truth is still the truth, and you can't escape the truth. They're doing something for you by whatever abilities they have, and it would be out of love. Well, it is from Paul. Now, verse 6 again, we continue, even though I am untrained in speech, yet I am not in knowledge. He's not untrained in knowledge. He had been taught, and he had been taught well. Matter of fact, he says, it wasn't men who taught me this. Now, the one who told him what to do to be saved, that was Ananias. Jesus told him to go into Damascus. There's one by the name of Ananias that will tell you what you must do. Okay. But as far as his knowledge, he's inspired of God. Now, he still says, we know in part and we prophesy in part. That's 1 Corinthians chapter 13. So, he didn't prophesy everything that was to be prophesied. He speaks nothing of the book of Revelation because he knows nothing about it. It's not given to him. But when it comes to the things that are necessary during his lifetime, he's got it. He knows it. So he's saying in knowledge, he's not untrained in knowledge, but we have been thoroughly manifested among you in all things. Did I commit sin in humbling myself that you might be exalted? Because I preached the gospel of God to you free of charge. Now, we discussed this last week where he does make mention of this in other spots, that he did not want to be a burden to them. And I cannot tell you why he would not be a burden to them, but he would take contributions and help from those in Macedonia. Why would he do it from other congregations and not from them? And I can't answer that question. There's something about the congregation in Corinth, something about the cultural climate, something about the people. I can't answer it, but he would not be a burden to them at all. He is going to work with his own hands, being a tent maker, working with Priscilla and Aquila there in Acts chapter 18. He is also going to be receiving funds from other congregations while he's there. Help for while he's there. And he takes nothing from them, and he is very vocal about it, if you will, concerning the fact that he didn't. Now, verse 8, I robbed other churches. Now, don't think that he means that he took something by force, or that he was able to extort something or just out and out stole it. He didn't. That they helped him willingly. I robbed other churches, taking wages from them to minister to you. And when I was present with you and in need, I was a burden to no one. For what I lacked, the brethren who came from Macedonia supplied. And in everything I kept myself from being burdensome to you. And so I will keep myself. Now, I can make some assumptions, but understand they're assumptions. But I think they're pretty solid. But I don't know. One is, it would appear like the Christians in Macedonia were more mature than those in Corinth. It would just seem that way. That they were already taking their responsibilities very seriously and the fact that you have them willing to help him in Macedonia. I'm sorry, those from Macedonia are willing to help him in Corinth, speaks a lot for those in Macedonia. It speaks a lot. It's not that those in Macedonia were necessarily more wealthy and were willing to do it, but that they would appear to be more spiritually strong and mature and wanted to do it, saw it as something that they needed to do. Meanwhile, you have the church in Corinth being ministered to by Paul and anyone else with him. And for them to grow, for them to mature, and of course, we know that wherever a church is established, the culture that surrounds it is going to be the culture that some of that culture just has to be tossed out, but it's still going to be there. All right, you've got to outgrow it, but it's still going to be there. And we could look at the 7 churches of Asia and see that every single congregation had a different problem, every single one of them. And we can look at the letters to Corinth or to Thessalonica or to Philippi, and even then we can see where there is a different character in each place. They're all supposed to have the same mind, same judgment, but there are different problems that infiltrate or that are just homegrown by somebody there, and it affects that local congregation. Now, he is saying that those of Macedonia were willing to help him there, and nobody at Corinth could lay any kind of claim against him, and this is a good thing. They could not lay any kind of claim against him that he was making disciples or that he was somehow taking advantage of them, wanting more gain out of this, wanting to fleece them. No one could make that claim at all because he was there working with his hands. He was there getting contributions from other places, not with them. Now, let's go to chapter 12 and beginning in verse 11. He's saying similar things here. So, chapter 12, verse 11, I have become a fool in boasting. You have compelled me. You've compelled me. What does that mean? That he wouldn't have brought up any of these things about not being a burden to them, about the work that he had done for them free of charge. He was making the sacrifices. Others were making the sacrifices. That they compelled him to do it, do this boasting. All right, and what he's called boasting is just setting out some facts for them, not to raise Paul up. Now, for us, it shows us the type of person that he was. That he was willing to do these things. And also is one who said, the more I love you, the less I am loved. The more I give, the less you seem to be giving back. But I have become a fool in boasting. You have compelled me, for I ought to have been commended by you. For in nothing was I behind the most eminent apostle, though I am nothing. There's that humility coming through. There isn't a ranking in apostles. There is no ranking. All right? Those that were chosen directly by Christ when he was here on this earth, Peter being one, Andrew being another, James and John, Matthew or Levi, Simon the Zealot, Judas Iscariot, all of them were chosen by Christ earlier. Now, Judas sinned, killed himself. He fell by transgression. Judas fell. All right, he's replaced by Matthias. Then, and that's after Christ had already ascended into heaven, then Christ brings in another one to be the apostle to the Gentiles. That's Saul of Tarsus, or Paul. And not a single one of the others, not Matthias, not Andrew, not John, could say that they had any kind of superior ranking over him or over him in some hierarchy of the apostles, that he is just like any of them. I was not behind the most eminent apostles, though I am nothing, which means don't consider them anything beyond what they are. All right, don't consider them anything other than they were chosen to be apostles, but even apostles, as we can find out from Judas, even apostles can fall. And they can fall hard. Even they can do it. Truly, the signs of an apostle were accomplished among you with all the perseverance in signs and wonders and mighty deeds. You cannot deny that the sign of an apostle was there. What is that sign? What's the sign of an apostle? They could do miracles, but so could the other members of the church perform miracles. Because he says in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, he talks about the various gifts of the Spirit they have. Speaking in tongues, some prophesying, healings. All right, so there are other miracles that are there. What's the sign of the apostle? Because I sort of gave it away. They could pass it on. There is no way any member at Corinth could have performed any kind of miracle whatsoever, whether it was speaking in tongues or whether it happened to have been prophesying. None of them could have performed any of those miracles if they had not come across an apostle. None. Well, who's the one that planted it? It was Paul. No other apostle was there in Acts chapter 18. No other apostle was there. And the sign of an apostle was done through him. And they, not being apostles, could not pass it on to anybody else. Those members in Corinth could not pass it on. Yes, ma'am. Okay, yes, signs, wonders, and mighty deeds. Okay, let's talk about that. Signs would be things that are, first off, that of prophecies being fulfilled. All right, and there would be prophecies being fulfilled with that they could witness. All right, they could witness that he's doing exactly what Joel said was going to happen, why Paul is doing it. And those with him could also perform miracles. And if I just say this, if they're around an apostle and they are members of the church, the likelihood is you would have others with Paul who could also perform miracles. But nevertheless, Joel 2 would be fulfilled not only just at Acts chapter 2. Acts chapter 2 was the beginning of that. And it's all with the beginnings of the church. Beginnings of the church was not just Acts chapter 2. That was the very beginning. But we're talking about through the first century. And that there would be signs done. One of those signs, also we've made mention, is that of being able to pass the gifts of the Holy Spirit. And that this could be done by those who obeyed Christ. They are members of the church, and he laid his hands on them. That too would be a sign. So now we have that of wonders and miracles, and these can get fuzzy between these two. Miracles we understand. You raised somebody from the dead. You healed somebody that it's obvious something was wrong with them. And all of these people, parents, friends, everyone knew this person has a history of being lame or of being blind, or that everyone in town knew this person was possessed by a demon. Everybody knew it. And an obvious miracle was done by Paul. And you have other things that were accomplished by him, that others couldn't do it, such as the 7 sons of Sceva. All right? They can evoke the name of Christ. They can even mention Paul, but they have absolutely no power over that demon. They have none. All right? And that demon even says, Christ I know, Paul I know. All right, it's more like Christ, yeah, I know him. Paul, I've heard of him, but who are you? All right, and it would be in the result of that is that there was fear and a logical conclusion that was coming to people who saw that or heard about that something marvelous obviously is happening, and not just anybody can do it. It takes more than just like a little incantation using Christ's name and Paul's name. It takes a whole lot more than that. It's not an incantation at all. And that demons weren't just driven out at when someone just says the name Jesus. It didn't happen. It takes the power of God to do that. Now, those in Corinth would have seen such. They would have seen these things. And let's continue in verse 13. For what is it in which you were inferior to other churches, except that I myself was not burdensome to you? Forgive me this wrong. If you want to consider it a wrong, forgive me of that wrong. But here's the thing. People, if they want to make excuses, if they want to point fingers, it doesn't matter what you did. They're going to point a finger. It doesn't matter if you were taking funds from them, which he could rightfully do, or he wasn't taking funds from them, which he could rightfully do that. It doesn't matter. That they will say, well, you didn't do this and you did do that, or you didn't do that and you did do this. It doesn't matter. Whatever path you took, they're going to lay blame somehow that you should not have taken that path when you had every right to do it. But forgive me this wrong. If you think it was wrong, forgive me this wrong. So, verse 14, now for the third time I am ready to come to you, and I will not be burdensome to you, for I do not seek yours, but you. I seek you. For the children ought not to lay up for the parents, but the parents for the children. And I will very gladly spend and be spent for your souls. All right, now there's a man who has a love for them. There's a man who has a love for them. He has not put on this cloak of an apostleship, which was given to him. He's not put this position into some sort of way that he can take advantage of them. He doesn't. And you can see the love that he has. He's willing to spend and be spent for them. He's willing to do it. That is a love for their souls. Though the more abundantly I love you, the less I am loved. Nevertheless, he says, I'm willing to spend and be spent. I'm willing to come there, and my dying breath is there trying to help the congregation. That's what he is willing to do. And even though the more abundantly I love you, the less I am loved. But be that as it may, I did not burden you. Nevertheless, being crafty, I caught you by cunning. All right? Cunning in what way? To bring them into the church. To bring them into their own salvation. All right? We know some of the things that he talked about, and this is all part of his character, is that I have become all things to all men. All right, he never wanted to be someone who would be offensive or someone who would cause somebody else to somehow stumble, or that there's something that is going to make them not want to study any further or go any further into the gospel of Christ. It would be their own refusal of the gospel of Christ, not anything that Paul did that was offensive to them. And so to the Jews, well, he's Jewish. To the Gentiles, he's not going to be someone who's going to condemn them for things they could rightfully do. He's not going to do it. Don't do anything that there's no selfish ambition. There's nothing wrong with ambition. It depends on what is the ambition. There's to be no selfish ambition. One can have the ambition of teaching as many people as possible, of being as faithful to God as you can, conscientious. There's nothing wrong with ambition, but selfish ambition and conceit, all those things have to be removed. That is going to work against the gospel and work against you every single time. Every single time. And Paul spoke of other preachers in his day that wanted to add to his chains, and that they were preaching out of more of selfishness and more of lifting themselves up than it was really with the correct intent of wanting to help souls. That they were doing it to try to climb a ladder that doesn't exist in the church. There is no ladder of hierarchy in the church. It doesn't exist. There's servants, and there's Christ, and then there's the Father, and the rest of the Godhead. All right? That's the only hierarchy there is. That's it. We're all ministers together. And in talking about those in his day, that there were others who they may very well have been doing things out of some kind of ambition that was wrong. It was nothing but selfish. That was it. Nothing else about it. And of course we have different, we're getting off subject at the moment, but that's all right, because we can talk about the things occurring in that day. But let's go to 2 Peter. 2 Peter chapter 2. And beginning in verse 1, but there were also false prophets among the people, even as there will be false teachers among you who will secretly bring in destructive heresies, even denying the Lord who bought them, and bring on themselves swift destruction. They are going to have false teachers come in. And these are, verse 2, and many will follow their destructive ways, because of whom the way of truth will be blasphemed. By covetousness they will exploit you with deceptive words. For a long time the judgment has not been idle, and their destruction does not slumber. And he continues on. Verse 12, but these, like natural brute beasts, made to be caught and destroyed, speak evil of the things they do not understand, and will utterly perish in their own corruption, and will receive wages of unrighteousness. And continuing on in this, having eyes full of adultery, and cannot cease from sin, enticing unstable souls, and going on from there. All right, Paul was, this is in contrast of what Paul was. This is in contrast of, there were some in the first century. This is what they did, but not Paul. Paul wasn't like that at all. Paul wasn't there to exploit them. He was there to sacrifice for them, to love even when that was not returned like it should have been. His was to be their bondservant, even when they could go right off the rails very quick. Okay? And so with Paul is doing these things not to be a burden to them and also not to seek his own, but seek what was good for them. That is a love that is unmatched. All right, because that comes from Christ. That comes from Christ. And of course, Christ's love is precisely what we are supposed to be mimicking. And how can anyone how could any of the Corinthians look at Paul honestly and suggest that he was trying to take advantage of them? And the question among them all would be, well, how? He's gotten no gain out of this whatsoever. Not from us, he hasn't. He's gotten no gain at all. And he was just here sacrificing himself for the time that he was here, and is willing to continue to do that. Now, let's go to 1 Thessalonians. 1 Thessalonians, and we want to go to chapter 2, and we'll begin in verse 11. I got to read my notes. All right, 1 Thessalonians 2, verse 3. Okay, we'll get it right. 1 Thessalonians 2, verse 3. For our exhortation did not come from error or uncleanness, nor was it in deceit. But as we have been approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel, even so we speak, not as pleasing men, but God, who tests our hearts. For neither at any time did we use flattering words, as you know, nor a cloak of covetousness. God is witness, nor did we seek glory from men, either from you or from others, when we might have made demands as apostles of Christ. But we were gentle among you, just as a nursing mother cherishes her own children, so affectionately longing for you, we were well pleased to impart to you not only the gospel of God, but also our own lives, because you have become dear to us. Now, he has that same love to the Christians in Thessalonica. He has that same love for them, willing to give up a lot for them. Now, we could go back and read 2 Corinthians chapter 11, which he goes through a list of the hardships that he went through. We could do that. And we can look at Paul as someone who could say, after all of this, that's enough. After all of this, I'm going to just cruise at the moment. That I've done enough for you. I've done enough for Christ. I've done enough for the church. I've done enough for the saving of souls. I've done enough for helping the church. I've done enough already. I've sacrificed enough already. Now I'm just going to step back. But he doesn't say that. He says, aside from all this, what comes upon me daily is my concern for all the churches. He's not holding back. He's not. And yes, it was his intent to die serving them unto the Lord. That was his intent. And if it meant dying in the pulpit, that's what he was going to do. If it meant dying while trying to serve them, or being killed as a martyr, that's what was going to happen. Now, concerning the apostles, we can't answer for every single one of them, because I don't really know what. Let's just say Simon the Zealot. I'm not just going to pick on him, but I don't know what he did outside of where we find them in Acts chapter 1, Acts chapter 2, and then a few more where he's not named by name, but he's among the apostles, because the apostles are there. All right, they're all there in that at the death of Stephen, you have members of the church leaving Jerusalem, but the apostles stay. So I can know that he stayed. And now, do all the apostles behave as they should? I don't know about that. Because we can look at the mistakes that Peter made, and we can look, and there's more than one mistake that he made. All right, but he came back. And we can also look at, once again, Judas Iscariot, that he just absolutely fell away and never returned. That was it for him. He's lost. He is, and when you have the Son of God talking about the woe to the one who betrays him, that it would be better if he had never been born, your Creator is saying that? All right, that's saying a lot. That's saying a lot. Now, with Paul says, I'm not any lower than the most eminent of the apostles, whoever you're going to make that to be, but yet I'm nothing. I'm nothing in all this. And I think that you have that thorn in the flesh that was always present. He couldn't get rid of it at all. That it kept him grounded. Plus, you think he didn't remember the cries and the pleading of those he dragged off years earlier? You think he couldn't hear them and remember their faces? Those that he knew, they died. They died in prison. They were put to death, only a few days later. You think he didn't remember those faces? And also Stephen, he was there. He didn't throw a stone, but he was there. You think he didn't remember that? He did. And now, I think with all of that, he doesn't have a pleasant background to go back to. His is one of persecuting the church and persecuting hard. Now, with that same amount of energy, he is going to die serving Christ. And that also means serving those Christ would want to save. And with some of them, they're not going to love you back. They're just not going to do it. And with some of them, they're going to go off and it's going to be like, well, this was entirely a waste of time. This was vain. Well, you did the work you were supposed to do. Their response to it is on them. What you did was right. But it comes back down to serving Christ also means we serve mankind. Even when, and members of the church, as all part of mankind, even when they don't like it, they don't appreciate it, they're not showing the same love back. Now some will. Who could say that Timothy didn't? Who could say that Luke didn't? Who could say that even Barnabas didn't, even when they had an argument? All right, I just in looking at the text can know that they still had very much a bond together. Some will, but some will not. They won't do it. And it may be a lengthy process for them to grow as they should and have an appreciation for what they've been given. An appreciation. And now, let's go to 2 Thessalonians. 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, beginning in verse 7. For you yourselves know how you ought to follow us, for we were not disorderly among you, nor did we eat anyone's bread free of charge, but worked with labor and toil night and day, that we might not be a burden to any of you. Not because we do not have authority, but to make ourselves an example of how you should follow us. Willingly giving up freedoms, rights, privileges for the sake of others. What did, and it's really a minor thing that he talks about when we're talking about Paul giving up anything and everything for the sake of helping others. but he talked about that of the weak brother, the one who's weak in faith, the one who's stronger in faith, one who says vegetables only, the other says that he can eat meat. One is not to despise the other is not to look down on the weak, nor is the weak to despise the stronger. But what does Paul say? He says, if eating meat caused my brother to stumble, I'll never eat meat again. I won't do it. Certainly not around them, but if it means never again, he's not going to do it. Now that really is a minor, sort of kind of a low scale thing compared to what he's willing to do and that he does do. Is he an example to us as well as to them? Yes. And those words, follow me as I also follow Christ. 1 Corinthians 11:1. All right? That applies to us as it applied to those in Corinth. Because he's following Christ, and we can see that being defined in the things that he does. His teaching was consistent, and it was the teaching of Christ. He never altered it. But for the sake of souls, he could make whatever sacrifices that he needed to make. He could do it. And if it meant that he had to do without, he would do without. If it meant that he would be going to prison, he would go to prison. That's what it came down to. And if it meant that they never truly appreciated him, or never truly understood the sacrifices he made, he's going to do it anyway. Because he's not out for their recognition. He's not out for their recognition, but to, as he says, to catch them, to bring them to Christ as a fisher of men, to bring them to Christ. That's what he wanted to do. Was it by fraud? No, it was by love. And it's by every sacrifice that he needed to make to do it. It was by love. Now, next week, we've run out of time. Next week, we're going to go through some of the hardships that he went through, and these are going to be mentioned in other books, not just 2 Corinthians 11. These are going to be in numerous other places, and looking at some of the hardships. Then, once we're through with that, we will be going on to our next study, which will be the book of Proverbs. And I thank everybody for being with us, and we will continue next week.